Hello, and welcome to the Batten Podcast, where we build mental resilience, fortitude, and faith through encouraging spiritual growth and maturity. I'm your host, Damian Batten, aka DJB, and I'm thrilled to have you join us today. Before we dive into today's episode, I want to take a moment to thank all of our listeners and supporters. Your continued support and feedback mean the world to us, and we couldn't do this without you. For our new listeners, welcome to the village. You're family now. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review if you enjoy the show. I want to hear from you. And to our longtime listeners, specifically speaking to my wife and my children who has stuck with me through thick and thin, helping me to grow, helping me to mature as a man and as a husband and as a father. And a shout out to you guys. I love you. You mean the world to me. Now let's get started with today's discussion. It's our very first episode. We're going to be talking about training like you fight. It's going to be great. I'm so excited. I hope you enjoy. Let's dive in. You're now listening to the Batten Podcast. The Batten Podcast.
Bless God, the devil's a liar, God's throw higher. 24/7 connection, no phone wire. Just talk to him, he hears you. Remember with Jesus' eyes, the devil plots I see through. No need to worry and fret, cause he ain't finished with the yet. If God be for me, then who can be against me? If I play David, then show me this Goliath. I got a rag and a rock, yeah, I'll kill the tyrant. Down goes the giant.
So a little bit about myself. You may be wondering, who is Damian Batten? Who is DJB? Why should I buy into his podcast? So I'll share with you a little bit about my background. So my wife and I have been married for 15 years. We have been together for 20 years. We were high school sweethearts. All right. We both grew up in Georgia. And let me just go ahead and say this. When I tell people that I'm from Georgia, they automatically assume I'm from Atlanta. What is up with that, first of all? What is up with that? Are you from Atlanta? No, I'm not from Atlanta. I'm from a small place called Midville, Georgia. You probably never seen it, never heard it before, right? But I went to school in a place called Waynesboro, Georgia, in Burke County. So we'll just use Waynesboro as a reference, right? So Waynesboro is about 30 to 40 minutes south of Augusta, Georgia. And if you're familiar with golf, right, and you know anything about golf, you know that you probably know about the golf tournament called the Masters, right, where they give out green jackets. I think the Masters is the only place they give out green jackets for winners. I don't know, but still, that's relatively where I'm from. I grew up in the country, and we didn't have a bunch of video games. We didn't have the parents, I should say, that allow us to sit in the house and play video games all day. They made us go outside. So it was a bunch of young boys out there my age and older, and we would go outside and we would play. And dude, what can I say, man? We played everything we can play. We went from fighting to wrestling to we played basketball, of course, football. We played baseball. We did it all, man. We did it all. We even had like fake wars, with BB guns and water guns or whatever the case is, airsoft. We had a good time. I enjoyed my childhood. I really did. Speaking of my childhood, I grew up in a single-parent home, raised by my mother. My mother was the breadwinner, aka the steel rod of correction, right? And my grandmother, she was the nurturer. She made sure that I was loved, and she was full of all the hugs and kisses and the encouraging word. And my mom, she was not into raising a weak, soft young man. I think you can read between the lines on that. So she made sure that that I was raised to be strong. And so that was my childhood. As far as my father, he wasn't in my life in my childhood. He wasn't much a part of that. There was a few years that I got to spend with him over the summer, but outside of that, there's not much to hang on to. And I would say that our relationship was a difficult, kind of complicated relationship. But unfortunately, that was the case for a lot of young black men in the 80s and 90s, having one or both of your parents incarcerated or had been incarcerated, growing up in a single parent home, the black father not being in the home. That was typical. I was not an exception, unfortunately. And so my growing up was a little different, but I was blessed to grow up around other young men who did have fathers in their life, and that kind of opened my eyes to realizing how valuable and important the role of a father is. So after so of course I played sports and stuff. My favorite sport would be football. I actually ended up getting a scholarship to West Virginia Tech to play football, and let me say it again. West Virginia Tech football. I don't want you to mishear me and misunderstand and think I said Virginia Tech. That's also a common thing when I tell people my story. Hey, yeah, I went to play ball in West Virginia Tech, and they start talking about Virginia Tech. No, it's two different schools, my friend. I went to West by God, Virginia. Okay. Oh, shout out to my Mountaineer fans. So I went to college in West Virginia and spent about 10 years there. I married my high school sweetheart, which would be my wife, Nikita. A few years after playing college ball, I needed something that was exciting, that encouraged me to work out and grow. Working at a call center just wasn't cutting it for me. I was physically strong and capable, and I wanted to exercise that. And so I got into law enforcement. I never forget the prayer that I prayed. Lord, I want to really help people, not just help people save money, but I want to help people and see their lives change. That was my prayer. And I'll never forget that when I left out of the building that day, I checked my phone because you couldn't have your phone in the building because we dealt with people like credit cards and stuff. So when I finally checked my phone, I had a text message from my pastor at the time who said, "Have you ever considered being a police officer?" And I thought that was hilarious because I never told him anything about anything. It was just me and God, me just talking to God about what I wanted. And here there's an opportunity for me to be a police officer. So I got into law enforcement. I don't think I was there very long. It felt like forever, but it was only like 4 years, I believe, maybe 4.5. I'm not really counting, but I enjoyed my job a little too much. People ask me why I left for a lot of reasons, but I enjoyed it too much, and I never wanted anything to come between me and my kids, and it started to come in between me and my family in certain ways, and I recognized that, so I got out. So while I was in law enforcement, I joined the military. I joined the Army National Guard, and I've been there for 10 years. Now that part has been great. It's a little weird how that didn't affect me as much as law enforcement did, but I've been overseas 3 times in those 10 years that I've been in, and I'm probably going to end up going again before I eventually get out. So I'm thrilled about my military career. I couldn't be prouder of my military career, but I tell you this part of my background specifically because being in sports and law enforcement and the military and simply just growing up the way that I did, you have to have a certain mindset. You have to have a certain mindset. You're constantly sharpening yourself. You're constantly competing, constantly trying to be the best, right? Constantly working on being better than your last performance. You want to increase what you have. You want to be better at what you do. And constantly grinding every single day, that takes a certain mindset. And, from sports, from playing little kid football, right? Pop Warner football, as they call it, all the way to collegiate level. And then going into law enforcement, being on a SWAT team, going through SWAT training, and then also been in the United States Army, going through basic training, going through air assault school, going through various other training scenarios. Like you're always trying to be better than your last performance. You're always trying to be the best version of yourself. And it takes a certain type of mindset to keep that up day in and day out. And so it's been called many different things over the time that I've been in the military, law enforcement, and sports. They said it in different ways, but I'm going to sum it up I'm going to sum it up for you the way that I probably heard it the most and what makes the most sense. The mindset that I had to have, the mentality that I had to have in of those arenas of trying to be the best version of myself is you train like you fight. That's something that they preach to us all the time. You train like you fight. Why? Because you fight like you train. If you think that all of a sudden the lights come on and magic is supposed to happen and you're supposed to be the victor, I mean, you can test that theory. Many people have tried to test that theory, right? But I'm just telling you right now, it is more than likely not going to go in your favor, right? So you train like you fight because you fight like you train. In other words, your training has to be just as intense or as close to the pressure, as close to the intensity as the real thing. So when we play football, man, we went after it, right? Because it had to be like playing a football game every single practice. So that when it was time to play the football game would actually seem to be easier than practice was because we practiced that hard. Same thing in training with SWAT, same thing in just standard police training, same thing in military training. It's you train like you fight. If you want to be a great fighter, you better train great so that you can fight like you train. I'm going to quote Mike Tyson here. Mike Tyson said, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the nose. And I mean, that couldn't be any truer. Everybody has a plan. Everybody has an ideal of how they think things should go or how they think things will go. But until you are met with an opposing force that is there bringing as much pressure to the game as you are, that's bringing as much talent to the game, as bringing as much skill to it, as bringing as much, dare I say, hatred to it as much as you are, man, you can put that plan to rest, especially if you haven't trained up to that level of intensity. You train like you fight. You have to have that winning mindset. This is a part of a winning mindset. You have to have that. You have to win in your mind before you ever go to the field. How do you know that you're winning in your mind before you go to the field? Well, you don't know. The answer is you don't know unless you train like you fight. You don't know. Speaking of training like you fight, the Batten Podcast, of course, it's my last name, but I didn't just name it because of my last name. It actually has some meaning to it. Batten, the definition of batten is to lock down, fasten, or to secure with a strip of metal or wood. That's like the active definition of batten. You know, you may have heard it in the movie Batten Down the Hatch, right? The actual meaning of batten is to strengthen or to reinforce a thing, right? That's what it truly means. To batten something is to strengthen it or to reinforce it. And it's the perfect name for this podcast because I want to strengthen and I want to reinforce your mental fortitude, resilience, and your faith. And I'm going to present to you challenges every single episode. Every single episode. Because I want to see you strengthen and I want to see your mental resolve reinforced. I want to see you put into practice, train like you fight as it relates to spirituality, as it relates to practical things in life. I want to see you win. So here's what you can expect out of the Batten Podcast. You can expect to be challenged so that you can spiritually grow and mature. You can expect to hear stories, awesome teachings. And another thing that you can expect Another thing that I really desire is to build a community or a village, because we weren't designed to do this thing on our own. You know, all these cool movies about the lone survivor, or which is a true story, and even in that, you see that he couldn't have made it if it wasn't for other people who stepped in to help him and to save him in the movie The Lone Survivor. So, like, even though these Lone Rangers and all these Hollywood movies that show you that this one man can take on an entire army, that stuff seems cool. It makes for a great story, and the reason why is because it ain't real. It's very entertaining because it ain't real. The reality is we need each other. We need each other. And lastly, you can expect the podcast to be a resource for you. To have any of your questions about life and faith answered right here. I am so glad to answer any questions. I know we live in an information era, but the information is at your fingertips. You can Google anything you want. You can research anything you want, and it's right there in front of you. But the problem is there's so many different voices out there. Who can you trust? Well, I would love to be a voice that you can trust. I would love to be a place that you can come to with your questions and know that you're going to get answers from Scripture. And I'm going to be able to support everything that I say. And so I do welcome all questions, all comments, all concerns. Now, let's jump into our discussion. In that same mindset of training like you fight, we're going to talk about some things here. Just a few things I want to share with you for our first episode. I just want to encourage each of you in this first episode, really, because I understand that we're living in historical times, and life is hard. I'm going to be honest with you. Life is hard. But I want you to know something. Hopefully this is comforting. If it's not comforting, then hopefully it at least makes sense. But life is hard on purpose. You're gonna hear me say that a lot. That's what I tell young people when I'm mentoring a young person or coaching a young person. This is what I'm saying. Life is hard on purpose. It's hard on purpose. It's not easy, and it's not meant to be easy. Why? Because how can you develop? How can you grow if there's no resistance? How can the best of you be presented if there's no resistance? If there's no pressure, right? I love this analogy. Pressure busts pipes, but pressure also creates diamonds. It's your perspective that determines what that pressure does. I love that. You see, we can war against that pressure, and we can have the mindset that it's supposed to be easy. This pressure isn't supposed to be too much, and it can end up collapsing us and causing a lot of damage in not only our lives, but in the lives of people around us, because our perspective of how to handle that pressure was wrong. It was flawed. But if we have the right perspective, looking at that pressure, looking at the situation and intensity of things going on around us, and if we know how to respond in that particular situation, man, we can make diamonds. It can really bring out the best in us. I really love what James says. We're going to open up the Bible real quick, and we're going to look at a couple of scriptures here. James, and a disciple of Jesus, he writes a letter, and this is what he says. First of all, James, let me just say how much I love the book of James. There's a lot of things that I quote out of James. He was just a practical guy, and he just spoke clear, plain English, okay? Well, he didn't speak English. He spoke, it's written in Greek, but you know what I mean? Like he just communicated in plain language. There's not a whole lot of poetic speech, poetic language. It was very, very literal, very plain, very straightforward. And this is what he has to say in verse 2. James chapter 1, verse 2, it says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. And perseverance, if you let perseverance finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. See, what is the purpose of this podcast? What do? We develop mental fortitude, resilience, and faith. How? By challenging you to grow spiritually and to mature. See, maturity is the end goal. And what James says is you need to have the right perspective. What is that perspective? Count it pure joy. Consider it pure joy when you face trials of many kinds. Instead of running away from the pressure, you need to welcome the pressure. Why? Because you know that it is testing your faith. And in the testing of your faith, that pressure is going to create something in you that is better than you ever thought it would be. In other words, it should bring the best out of you. That pressure should be producing diamonds on the inside of you. That's what James is saying here. Mature and complete, not lacking anything. But if you find yourself, I'm about to read verse 5 here in a second. But what happens if you find yourself in an intense moment under pressure and what you need, it feels like you don't have? You are actually lacking in this area. Then he has something to say about that too. In verse 5, he says, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. That lacks wisdom. He's talking about wisdom of life. How do you respond during those trials of many kind? That's why he says wisdom, because he's talking about how to respond in those situations. But let me just say it like this. If you're in a situation where you need peace, but you lack peace, then ask God for peace. If you're in a situation where you need patience and you find yourself lacking patience, ask for patience. If you need wisdom, you need to know how to respond. Somebody's testing you. Somebody trying you. I heard somebody say, try Jesus, don't try me. Well, technically, if you belong to Jesus and they try you, they are trying Jesus, because it's no longer I that live, but he that live within me, right? So anyway, I'm just thought I'd throw that out there. Verse 6 says, but when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea blown and tossed by the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Such a person is double-minded and unstable in all he do, or in all they do. Man, that's some heavy-hitting language right there. That is some heavy-hitting language right there. They are double-minded and unstable in all that they do. I don't think I have to really explain that. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Like I said, James speaks plainly. But I do want to present a story to you, perhaps to make it a little bit more tangible to you. So back in 2019, I was getting ready to be deployed. A lot of things was going on in that time. I'm getting ready to be deployed. We're facing some financial hardships. Our rent, because we're staying in apartments, our rent kept going up, and my income wasn't going up. I was the only one working at the time, and we have been in this pretty intense situation for a couple of years at this point. And it went from where we were in a 2-bedroom apartment to we went down to a 1-bedroom apartment. Hey, this is my testimony. I'm not ashamed of it. You know what I mean? We went to a 1-bedroom apartment. So it was my wife and I and my 2 girls at the time. And we were living in a 1-bedroom apartment. Okay, my girls' bunk beds was in the kitchen or / the dining room area. Right. So it was a tight squeeze, you know what I mean? And here we are living like this for a year. And we have been praying, Lord, would you bless us with a house, because we want to do ministry out of our home. We want to have small groups to come over to our house. We want to serve people in our home. And we can't really do that because it ain't no space in here for us. How can we invite somebody else into an already crowded place? And so we prayed and asked God for that. But the reality was we were not in any type of position financially to purchase a house. I'm just being honest. There was no savings. We was living paycheck to paycheck. My credit was still recovering. My credit was still recovering. We were not in any type of position to buy a house. Here we are, our lease is coming to an end, right? And we're faced with the option, either you sign a new lease and pay the increased price for this still small 1-bedroom apartment, or you can find another place to stay. Now, my wife and I, we would get up every morning at 4 o'clock and we would pray. And in that prayer time, the Lord had told us that he was going to get us a house. So we have prayed for it. God says, I'm going to do it. But in my mind, I'm thinking, we're going to need to see some change. Like, it's going to be a miracle. We need to see some changes if this thing is going to come to pass, right? I mean, I'm not saying that God won't send somebody to give me $1 million or give me $100,000 or whatever the case is. I'm not saying that God wouldn't use somebody to just give me a house. I mean, he would definitely do that. But all I'm saying is I'm not seeing it, and we need something to happen because the pressure is on. We got to make a decision. What are we going to do? And I remember we went to church shortly after the Lord said he was going to do it. We went to church, and sure enough, somebody confirmed what the Lord said to us. God is going to get us a house. And I just remember saying, okay, I hear you, Lord. I believe you. I take you at your word. I'm not going to doubt that you're going to do it. But man, I tell you, I was put to the test in my words, because everybody in my circle was getting houses. I mean, they had been spending years, preparing to buy a house. They had spent years preparing for a house. Me, not so much. And they were finally getting houses and opportunities. And I'm hearing all of these miraculous stories, people buying a house and finding money all in this house. And I'm like, Lord, that's what I need right now. Like, I need to buy a house and for really cheap, and then go looking through the cabinets and through certain places and find money stashed away. I would love that, Lord. But that's not what I got. I was waiting. But once we received that confirmation while we was at church, my wife and I decided that we were going to make a move of faith, right? We were going to meet God halfway. We was going to move in faith, not physically move like to a different location, but we were going to make a move to show him that we trusted him and we had received his word. And so my wife and I began to buy a bunch of boxes and collect boxes from the surrounding stores, and we began to pack up our 1-bedroom apartment. Now, for a certain amount of time, we were living out of boxes. Remember, I'm getting ready to be deployed. There's a lot of loose ends here. The pressure is on. My family's living out of a box. Our living conditions haven't changed. And I'm still trusting that the Lord's going to do what he says he's going to do, but I don't see any changes. It was an entire year my wife lived out of a box. I had gone overseas. But because I believed God and I didn't want to doubt him, my wife and I made the arrangements that while I was away, she can buy a house in my name if God opened the door to do so. I just wanted an opportunity to be there, and I want to make sure that I cross all my T's and dot all my I's. That's an old school saying for you young cats. I want to make sure I cross all my T's and dot all my I's to make sure that when the time came, I won't be the hindrance that held us up from getting what God had promised us. I wanted to make sure I did everything in faith. And sure enough, in 2020, while I was yet still overseas, not only did God bless us with a new house, but God blessed us with a new car. I'm telling you, the Lord is faithful and he is good, but if I had asked and doubted, we would have never packed our house up. We would have, because see, in that season, we was looking at different apartments, and we was trying to see if we can maybe we can rent a house and we can do life out of a rented house. And God was like, I don't want this for you. I'm going to get you your own house. And for a while I did doubt, and I continued to put in applications for different apartments and homes and stuff like that. But it was costly. Putting an application to rent, they cost money. And I realized that I was losing money. And every time I put money out for an application, the Lord would remind me, this isn't what I have for you. And that door would close. The door would close. And so I know what it's like to doubt, but I also know what it's like to believe and see God move in my life. And I just want to encourage you today, no matter where you are, right, you need to have that mentality. You need to change your perspective and welcome that pressure. This is why we train like we fight. Because if I didn't exercise faith in the little things, packing up, living out of a box. If I didn't exercise faith in the little things, like getting up every morning to pray with my wife. If I didn't exercise faith in the little things, like trusting him to meet my daily needs. If I didn't trust him in the little things, how could I ever truly trust him to get a house for me? But I train like I fight. I trained that I can depend on God, that he will meet all of my needs. I trained that in every little thing in my life. So that when it was time to believe God for the bigger things, I could do it. I could do it. I want you to develop the mentality and the fortitude and the strength and the faith to believe God's promises. I want you to develop, hear me out, I want you to develop the faith and the fortitude, the mental resilience to believe God's promises. That's where we'll start. Just trusting and believing his promises. I told you what you can expect from this podcast is a challenge. So I want to challenge you. I challenge you to find out what are the promises of God. What are his written promises in Scripture? And I want you to write those things down in your journal. I want you to write them down in your journal. And I want you to seriously consider, is this promise being met in your life? And if it is, praise God for it. And if it ain't, if you feel like it ain't, then this is your opportunity to be intentional about seeking the Lord for what you lack. The reason why David could slay Goliath with such confidence and boldness is because God had already sent the lion and the bear. We got to learn to slay the lion and the bears. That's practice. That's the precursor. That's practice. That's training. The lion and the bears. Don't run from them. You have been given those lions and bears for a reason, because there's a Goliath that you need to slay somewhere, and you need to be faithful, and you need to cut your teeth. That's an old school saying right there. You need to start cutting your teeth on these little challenges and these little trials and tribulations. And the more intense the lions and the bears are, that's great, because that's better prepared you're going to be for the Goliaths out there. There's a lot of giants with your name on them. You got to slay them. There's a lot of giants. There's a lot of generational curses, giants that you got to slay. But it doesn't start with you facing Goliath. It starts with you facing the lions and the bears. That's my challenge to you. What are the lions and the bears in your life that you need to address? With the correct mindset that these things are not given to me to break me, but they're given to me to create a diamond, to create something precious on the inside of me. That's the first thing I want you to do. I want you to write down in your journal the lions and the bears in your life. Those trials, those small tests, the training, right? Those small things. I want you to write it down. And then I want you to look up the promises God has made as it relates to those lions and bears. If you're in a situation now where you need patience because you're facing a marriage issue, or you're facing issues with your kids, or you're facing issues at your school, right? I want you right now, or whenever you get a chance, before you close your eyes tonight, write in a journal. If you don't have a journal, find some piece of paper. And I want you to write down the lions and bears that you're facing. And then I want you to go look up in Scripture. Thank God for Google, right? I want you to look up in Scripture the promises that God has made pertaining to that situation. If you're battling with loneliness, what does God say about loneliness? What are his promises about loneliness? I never leave you nor forsake you. That means that right now in this valley, God, you're with me. That's your challenge for this week. Next week, I want you to stay tuned. I want you to lock back in. I'm going to be sharing a word called embrace the tension. Embrace the tension. It's going to be good. It's going to be great. You don't want to miss it. Again, thank you guys for listening. You guys have a blessed week. Until we meet again. I love you guys. Peace.